2 words. That is all it took to set the entire world of women's basketball on fire. Someone inside the Team USA training facility in San Juan heard them first. Then a teammate heard them. Then someone with a phone passed them along, and within hours, those 2 words, "I quit," had traveled from a gym in Puerto Rico to every corner of the internet faster than any official roster announcement USA Basketball has ever managed to produce. No press conference, no statement, no explanation. Just 2 words and a reaction so immediate, so massive, so visceral that it told you everything you needed to know about what Caitlin Clark means to this sport right now. Not just to her fans, not just to Indiana, to the entire architecture of women's basketball as a commercial, cultural, and competitive entity in 2025. Think about that for a second. 2 words from inside a training camp that had not even played a game yet. No footage, no box score, no on-court incident that anyone could point to and analyze. Just a whisper moving through a facility in Puerto Rico, and within the hour, sports media was fully mobilized. Podcasts were recording emergency episodes. Twitter threads were stretching to 30, 40, 50 posts. Former players were going live on Instagram. Beat reporters who cover the WNBA were lighting up group chats. The reaction was not proportional to the information available. It was proportional to the person at the center of it. And that gap between how little was confirmed and how enormous the response was tells you more about Clark's position in this sport than any statistic ever could. But here is what almost every headline completely missed. This was not a breakdown. This was not emotion overriding logic. This was not a star player throwing a tantrum because she was not getting enough touches in a glorified practice session. This was the final crack in a pressure system that had been building for over a year. Stress fractures accumulating quietly beneath the surface until one specific decision inside one specific coaching staff made the whole thing structurally impossible to hold together any longer. What happened in that training camp was not a surprise to anyone who had been watching this situation closely. It was the logical destination of a pattern that started long before anyone boarded a flight to Puerto Rico. A pattern built from roster politics, coaching conflicts, system mismatches, and a sports institution that has historically been far more comfortable managing its stars than empowering them. And if something about this entire situation felt wrong to you from the moment that coaching staff was announced, you were right. We are about to connect every dot they glossed over. Start here because the context is everything. Caitlin Clark just completed the best rookie season in the WNBA history. Not one of the best, not arguably the best. She led the entire league in assists. She finished 3rd in scoring. She took the Indiana Fever from 13 wins to 24 wins in a single calendar year. That is not incremental progress. That is not a team trending in the right direction. That is a franchise transformation executed inside 12 months by a player who had never played a professional game before tip-off in May. And it happened in front of the largest audience women's basketball had ever drawn in the history of the sport. Not just the largest for that particular season, but the largest ever recorded since the league began keeping track. Television ratings climbed at a rate the WNBA had never experienced before. Arena attendance climbed. Road game attendance climbed, meaning opposing teams were selling out buildings in cities that had previously struggled to fill half the seats on a good night because Clark was the visiting player and people wanted to be in the building when she played. Merchandise moved at levels the league had never tracked before. Casual fans, who had never once watched a WNBA game, were suddenly checking box scores on Tuesday nights because Clark was playing. People who openly admitted they did not follow women's basketball, who had no prior connection to the sport, no team loyalty, no established viewing habit, were tuning in and staying tuned in because of one player. The growth was not subtle. And it was not gradual, it was seismic, and it was concentrated. Every analyst, every executive, every person inside the sport with functioning eyes could see exactly where it was coming from. This was a talent-driven phenomenon attached to one specific name, and the WNBA, to its credit, understood immediately that what it had on its hands was something it had never had before. Not just a great player, but a player whose presence was actively changing the commercial reality of the sport in real time. This was the environment Clark had built in year one. Built from scratch, in a market that had been largely dormant for years, with a roster that had missed the playoffs in 11 of the previous 12 seasons. None of it came easily, because this is the same player that USA Basketball had looked at just 1 year earlier and decided was not ready.
Cast your mind back to the summer of 2024. The Paris Olympics roster was being finalized. Clark had just been selected first overall in the WNBA draft. Her professional career had not yet produced a single game, a single assist, a single moment at the WNBA level. USA Basketball made their decision before she ever stepped onto a professional court, before she had played a single meaningful minute in the league she had just entered. She was left off. The official explanation was clean and straightforward. She had not yet proven herself at the pro level. Give her time, they said. Let her develop. Come back when you have a body of work that justifies inclusion in a program with this level of competition and this level of expectation. It was a defensible position on its face. You could construct an argument for it, and plenty of people did. But the timing was uncomfortable, because the decision was made before the evidence existed either way. She was not evaluated based on professional performance. She was excluded based on the absence of professional performance. A circular logic that conveniently kept the door closed at exactly the moment when the most anticipated women's basketball player in a generation was entering the league. So she went out and built the body of work they said she needed. She did not just meet the bar they set, she cleared it by a margin that left the sport struggling to find historical comparisons. The records fell one after another. The ratings climbed week after week. The attention compounded on itself until women's basketball was generating cultural conversations it had never been part of before. When the 2025 Team USA roster dropped on February 4th, her name was finally on it. 12 names in a list, Clark somewhere in the middle. No feature image, no spotlight, no video announcement, no acknowledgement that this specific woman had done exactly what they asked of her and then exceeded it in front of the biggest audience the sport had ever assembled. One comment online captured the feeling of that moment better than any sports column managed to. She had broken every record she could touch, and they still treated her like a backup plan. That single sentence earned over 40,000 likes before the roster announcement itself had widely circulated. People felt what was underneath it immediately. The institutional coldness of that announcement was not lost on anyone who had been following Clark's year. After everything she had delivered, after the records, after the ratings, after the cultural shift she had single-handedly accelerated, the acknowledgement was a form letter. And that photo, that flat, bureaucratic list of 12 names, was just the opening signal. The real story arrived 3 days later. When the coaching staff was revealed, the temperature in the conversation shifted fast, and it shifted hard. Kara Lawson from Duke was named head coach. On paper, the resume holds up. Credentialed, experienced, known commodity inside the college coaching world. A name that USA Basketball could point to and say, this is a serious person with a serious background. But on the court, Duke had spent the 2024 to 2025 season as one of the most offensively stagnant programs in the country. Their spacing was broken for stretches that went well beyond a rough patch. Ball movement slowed in critical late-game situations, exactly when it needed to accelerate. Scoring dried up in the moments that determined outcomes. Multiple analysts flagged it publicly throughout the year. This was not a quiet internal whisper among insiders who follow the program closely. It was documented, discussed, and widely noted by people who cover the college game professionally. The critique was not harsh or personal. It was consistent and specific.
Duke's offensive architecture under Lawson struggled with the same problems in the same moments repeatedly. And now that same offensive identity, that same philosophy about pace, structure, and control was being installed as the foundational framework for a roster that included Clark, Paige Beckers, Angel Reese, Chelsea Gray, and Kelsey Plum. Sit with that mismatch for a moment, because it matters more than it might initially seem. You have assembled arguably the most explosive collection of offensive talent women's basketball has ever seen gathered at the national level below the Olympics. Players who, when given space and freedom and a system designed around movement and pace and creative decision-making, can dismantle any defense on the planet. Players who individually are capable of creating advantages from nothing, of manufacturing baskets in ways that most defensive schemes simply cannot account for. And the coaching architecture being constructed above them does not say, let them play. It does not say, trust your talent and get out of the way. It says, control the tempo, protect the structure, manage the game within a framework that prioritizes organizational discipline over individual expression. The gap between what these players are capable of and what the system was designed to allow, that gap is not just a philosophical difference of opinion, it is the kind of structural contradiction that produces exactly the type of friction that eventually becomes public. The coaching staff announcement had one more piece though, and that piece is the one that changed the entire story from a general concern about system fit to something far more specific and far more charged.
The moment Stephanie White's name appeared on the assistant coaching staff list, anyone paying close attention understood that something had fundamentally shifted in the nature of this situation. Here's the timeline laid out in sequence, because the sequence is the story, and the story only makes sense when you see every step in order. April 2024. Stephanie White serves as a court coach at the Women's National Training Camp. She is between jobs at this point, not affiliated with any active program, available because her previous position had ended. October 2024. White is hired as head coach of the Indiana Fever, the same franchise Caitlin Clark plays for, the same organization Clark had just finished her historic rookie season with. December 2024. White returns to a Team USA event in an assistant capacity just 2 months into her new role with Indiana. March 2025. White is officially listed on the coaching staff for the FIBA qualifying tournament in San Juan, Puerto Rico. 4 separate USA basketball appearances, all of them inside Clark's professional orbit, all of them compressed into under 12 months. A timeline so tight and so consistent that it stopped feeling like coincidence and started feeling like a pattern. Now think carefully about what that actually means for Clark as an athlete trying to grow, trying to expand, trying to reach the next level of her game after the most successful rookie season the league had ever seen. She spent an entire WNBA season inside White's system. Every film session, every practice repetition, every play call in every game situation, every rotation decision, every timeout, every in-game adjustment, every conversation about offensive philosophy, every discussion about how the team should operate when the game was close and the pressure was highest. All of it filtered through one coaching philosophy, one offensive framework, one specific set of priorities about how the game should be played and who should have the ball when it mattered most. When elite athletes at Clark's level finish a season, there is something they need that is not a luxury and is not optional. It is developmental oxygen, a different environment, a different voice asking different questions about their game, a different system that challenges them in ways their primary coach has never challenged them, that exposes different weaknesses and builds different strengths and forces them to solve different problems. The reset is how the best players in the world keep growing past the ceiling that their current environment imposes on them. It is how they avoid the plateau that comes from being shaped by only one perspective, one philosophy, one set of answers for too long. Michael Jordan had Phil Jackson, but also worked with different trainers and coaches in the off-season specifically to get perspectives his primary staff could not give him. The best players seek out different friction because they understand that different friction produces different growth. Clark never got that reset. White followed her directly from Indiana to the national program. The voice asking the questions in San Juan was the same voice that had been asking the questions all year in Indianapolis. The offensive framework being installed at the national team level was being installed by someone who had spent the previous 12 months building it around Clark in a WNBA context that had produced documented concerns about how it was limiting her in the moments that mattered most. And that is the core of what people were actually reacting to when White's name appeared on that staff list. Even the fans who could not fully articulate why it bothered them. Even the ones who just said, "Something feels wrong," without being able to explain exactly what. The instinct was sound, the concern was legitimate, and the on-court evidence gives it a foundation that goes beyond feeling. Because the frustration is not just philosophical. It is not just about developmental theory or abstract arguments about what elite athletes need. There is documented, specific on-court evidence that gives the concern its concrete foundation. Clark averaged 19.2 points, 8.4 assists, and 5.7 rebounds in her rookie season, numbers that would place her in the elite tier of the league in virtually any recent year. Historically strong numbers for a first-year player by any reasonable comparison. Numbers that, in most organizations, would have generated an off-season conversation about how to build more of the offense specifically around what she does best. How to put her in more situations where her most dangerous skills are the ones being deployed, not fewer. But analysts tracking her usage patterns through the full season identified something important sitting just beneath those headline statistics. Her shot attempts dipped in specific high-leverage moments. Her fourth-quarter involvement in close games ran consistently below what you would expect from a player performing at her individual level throughout the rest of those same games. The opportunities dried up precisely when they needed to arrive. The clearest example, the one that became a fixed reference point in every serious conversation about Clark and White's system, came in Game 2 of Indiana's first-round playoff series against Connecticut. Indiana was down 4 at 3 minutes remaining in a game they needed to win to keep the series alive. Clark had 22 points on the night. She was unambiguously the hottest player on the floor. The matchup favored her. The moment called for her. The ball did not find her the way it needed to. The pick-and-roll actions that create her best looks were not called. The off-ball movement that puts her in position to receive in rhythm was not run. Indiana lost the game. They lost the series. The season ended. And that specific sequence, those final 3 minutes, that specific failure to go to the player who was clearly the right choice in that specific moment, became a reference point that analysts and fans and former players kept returning to throughout the entire offseason whenever the conversation turned to how White's system related to Clark's particular strengths. Her ability to operate off the pick and roll, her off-ball movement, the specific read and react actions that make her the hardest player in the league to guard when she is allowed to run them freely.
That same dynamic, that same friction between what Clark does best and what the system around her was structured to prioritize, did not stay in Indiana when the plane landed in Puerto Rico. It traveled with the coaching staff. It arrived in San Juan fully intact. And Clark, who had watched it play out across an entire season, and then watched the same people board the same plane to install the same framework at the national team level, reached the end of her patience with it. Before the team flew south, Clark raised a concern. She did it in a team meeting. She did not go to social media. She did not call a reporter. She did not make it personal or call anyone out by name in a public forum. She did what professionals are supposed to do. She brought the concern into the room, directly to the people with the authority to address it, and she asked the question that needed to be asked.
Why was the offensive structure limiting pick-and-roll actions and off-ball movement for the guards? Specifically, the actions she is most dangerous running. Specifically, the things that had produced her historic rookie numbers. Specifically, the things that had been absent in the moments that cost Indiana their playoff series. It was a professional question, a legitimate basketball question. The kind of question that, in a functional organizational environment, gets a thoughtful answer and opens a productive dialogue about how to deploy the roster's talent most effectively. Kara Lawson responded. The exchange reportedly became heated. Not a quiet professional disagreement that gets filed away and revisited at the next film session. Heated. Voices elevated. The room changed. The kind of exchange that travels through a locker room before the meeting is even officially over, because people can feel when something significant has just happened, even if they did not hear every word. After that meeting, word moved through the camp fast. Clark had told teammates she was done, that she was seriously considering walking away from the tournament entirely, that she had reached the point where staying felt like it was working against her rather than for her. Those two words, "I quit," started circulating inside the facility before USA Basketball had any realistic chance of getting ahead of the story or shaping how it would be told. By the time anyone in an official capacity could have assembled a statement or called a press conference or reached out to a trusted reporter to frame the narrative, it was already everywhere. The story had escaped the building before the building knew it was gone. Clark showed up to practice the next morning. She was there. She laced up. She ran the drills. She did not get on a plane and fly home. But sources who were present inside the facility described her as visibly different from the player who had arrived at camp days earlier. Quieter, less engaged. The energy she had brought into the facility at the start of camp, the energy that makes her the player she is, the competitive intensity that drives everything she does, had changed in a way that was immediately noticeable to anyone who had been around her for more than an afternoon. The shift was not invisible. It was felt throughout the facility. The environment changed because she changed, which is what happens when the most important person in a room becomes visibly disconnected from what is happening around her. Clips started leaking from the training camp in the hours and days that followed. Clark standing apart from teammates during breaks, leaving the gym alone rather than in the group. Small moments, individually unremarkable, the kind of thing you would scroll past without a second thought on any other day. But in context, with everything that had happened in the 48 hours before them, with the two words already circulating, with the heated meeting already being described by sources, every single one of those images told a completely different story. Context transforms everything, and the context here was already fully loaded before the first clip appeared online. Here's why this extends far beyond a qualifying tournament and why the stakes of what happened inside that gym in Puerto Rico are genuinely significant for the future of the sport. San Juan is not just a tournament. It is the first major audition for two events that represent the highest possible platform women's basketball has ever been given the opportunity to stand on. The 2026 FIBA World Cup in Berlin, and the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles, on American soil, in an American city, in front of an American audience that is more invested in women's basketball right now than at any point in the history of the sport. These are not abstract future milestones. They are the stages that will define the next chapter of this sport's growth. And the roster decisions that lead into those stages are not made in a vacuum. They are informed by what happens in the auditions that come before them. San Juan is one of those auditions, one of the most important ones. Players who get meaningful minutes here, who operate inside systems designed around their actual skill sets, who are trusted in high-leverage situations, who demonstrate they can perform at this level in this environment, those players carry a real and measurable momentum into the decisions that follow. players who are managed into limited roles, who are forced into offensive structures that actively work against their strengths, who are not trusted with the ball when the game is on the line. Those players are fighting an uphill narrative when the bigger selections happen, regardless of what their WNBA statistics say.
Chelsea Gray and Kelsey Plum are both veterans with Paris gold medals, both players who carry years of institutional history with the people making decisions inside USA Basketball's selection structure. They know how the system works because they have navigated it successfully for years. Clark enters this environment as the statistically dominant force in current women's basketball, but USA Basketball's traditional culture has always placed significant weight on longevity, on institutional relationships, on hierarchy built over time through years of participation in the national program. Raw performance metrics are important, but they operate within a culture that values other things too. And with Stephanie White on the bench, whose Indiana rotations had already demonstrated a documented preference for veteran-initiated sets in the critical moments of close games, the concern inside Clark's camp is not hypothetical or paranoid. It is backed by a specific, documented, publicly observable year of evidence that every serious analyst who covers the WNBA watched play out in real time. And here's the trap, the specific structural trap that makes this situation particularly dangerous for Clark's long-term positioning. If she underperforms at this tournament, the narrative will not be complicated. It will not take into account the system she was placed in, or the minutes she was given, or the actions that were or were not called for her in the moments that determined outcomes. If her numbers in San Juan fall below expectations, if she operates off the ball in situations where she should be the primary action, if the system limits her the way Indiana's did in the playoff moments that became the defining reference points of her first season, the story that gets written will not focus on any of that context. It will focus on the player, not the structure, not the coaching decisions, not the mismatch between what the system was designed to do and what the player being placed inside it is best at doing. The player. Clark takes the blame. Couldn't perform at the national team level, couldn't adapt to a different environment, needs a specific set of conditions to produce her numbers. Not a true winner, not someone you can build around when the stakes are this high. That is the story. And once it is written, it does not get easily rewritten. It follows her into the next roster cycle and the one after that. That is the pattern. It is not unique to women's basketball. It is not unique to this situation. It has played out in team sports at every level in every era, more times than anyone can count. A player gets placed in a system that does not fit their game, the system underperforms, the player gets blamed for the underperformance. The system remains protected because the system is controlled by the people doing the evaluating. The player has to fight a narrative they did not create to reclaim a reputation they should never have had to defend. The fact that Clark identified this pattern, walked into a team meeting and said something about it directly, in the room, to the coaching staff, before the tournament started rather than after it ended, that is not the behavior of someone creating unnecessary drama. That is the behavior of someone who understood exactly what was at stake for her career and for her long-term relationship with USA Basketball, and who refused to let it play out in silence. That takes more composure than staying quiet, and it is worth recognizing for what it is. Here is where things actually stand. Clark did not officially withdraw from the program. She is still in Puerto Rico. She showed up the next morning. She practiced. She has not boarded a plane home. And that single fact that she is still there, still in the building, still in the uniform, tells you something important about the larger picture she is playing toward and the level of strategic clarity she is operating with, even in the middle of what is clearly a genuinely difficult situation. The 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles, on home soil, in front of the American audience that she personally helped bring into this sport in numbers it had never seen before, that is the destination. That is the stage that makes everything else worth navigating. A home Olympics, in a sport whose growth she has driven more than any other individual, in a city that will be watching women's basketball with a level of cultural investment it has never matched. Leaving now, burning the relationship with USA Basketball in a public, definitive, and unambiguous way costs her something real in terms of what comes next. It costs her positioning in the roster conversations. It costs her the institutional goodwill she will need when Berlin and Los Angeles selections are being made. She knows that, she has thought about it, and she is still there. But still being there does not mean the tension has resolved. It does not mean the concerns raised in that team meeting have been addressed, or that the system has been adjusted, or that the relationship with the coaching staff has been repaired. It means she is managing something very difficult in a very compressed timeline with enormous long-term consequences attached to every decision she makes and every word she says and every morning she shows up or does not show up to practice. The most watched player in women's basketball is standing inside a training camp in Puerto Rico right now, in a situation that is about far more than one qualifying tournament, questioning whether the people running this program are genuinely interested in building around what she can do, or whether they are primarily interested in maintaining a structure and asking her to fit inside it on their terms.
The audience that has shown up for this sport in numbers it has never seen before did not come for a system. They did not come for a coaching philosophy or an organizational hierarchy or an institution's preferred approach to roster management. They came for the players. They came specifically, overwhelmingly, demonstrably for Clark. And the sport is now at a crossroads, a moment it did not fully anticipate and is not fully equipped to navigate cleanly, where the most important player in the game and the institution built to represent her on the world stage are visibly, publicly, unmistakably not operating from the same page. What happens in San Juan will not stay in San Juan. It will shape the conversation heading into Berlin. It will shape the conversation heading into Los Angeles. It will shape how the next generation of players understands what USA Basketball actually values and how it treats the athletes who drive the sport's growth. The pattern that brought us here is not finished. It is still unfolding. And the next move belongs to USA Basketball, because right now, they are the ones with something to prove.